Okay, again, I am very lucky to work with a very dedicated, hardworking group with Utah Safety Council. You all are very lucky to have them to help support your safety programs in your workplaces, and please engage with them. We're here to help. We're here to advance our mission of saving lives and safety for everybody. And on that note, I'm very honored to introduce our keynote speaker for the afternoon. Dr. Christy Glass is a professor of sociology at Utah State University. She joined USU after earning her PhD from Yale University. Her teaching and research focus on workplace justice, analyzing how gender and race influence opportunities within work organizations. Alongside WSU management professor Allison Cook, she has been a trailblazer in research on the glass cliff phenomena and the impact of representation and organizational practices. Her work has been published in leading sociology and management journals and featured in prominent media outlets such as the New York Times, The Guardian, National Public Radio, PBS, Forbes Magazine, BBC, CNN, and the Harvard Business Review. Let's please welcome Dr. Christy Glass to the stage.
Thank you for having me here. It's really nice to be in the room and see so many, I'm gonna spill this water, so I'll let you know when it happens. It's just imminent. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. I've worked with the Women in Safety group and so enjoyed our interactions, and I'm pleased to be with the larger group today. And I wanna just thank you all for all your efforts to keep Utahns safe on our roads, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our communities. So thank you for having me here today. I want to talk about how we can promote equity and belonging at work. And I want to highlight the fact that the point of equity and belonging is not giving some an advantage over others. That's a myth. Instead, the reason I do what I do is because I know that promoting equity and belonging is about removing all of the things that get in the way of recruiting, hiring, promoting, retaining based on talent. So what I spend a lot of time thinking about is talent, right? Skill, ability. How can we get all of the noise out of the way so that the only thing that matters when we show up is our ability and our talent? Because I know that when we hire and retain and promote based on talent and skill, we're all better. Our decisions are better, our organizations are stronger. And when we hire and retain and promote based on other factors, we all lose. Because our organizations, our teams, our workplaces are only as good as our talent, are only as good as the depth of our bench. And I want to illustrate this point with a powerful example that I spend a lot of time thinking about, actually. Leroy Satchel Paige, considered by many to be the greatest pitcher to ever pick up a baseball. And forgive me, I'm from Michigan where baseball is really big. I grew up watching the World Series Tigers. I realize there's not a baseball team in Utah, but I assume I've got some baseball fans in the room nonetheless. Satchel Paige played professional baseball for 5 decades before he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. He played for the Southern Negro Leagues in the midst of the Jim Crow South, and he was a showman. He often told his infielders and his outfielders to sit down while he pitched because he was so confident that he was going to strike out the next batter. Can you imagine this? Yet, due to the color line in professional sports at the time, he didn't join Major League Baseball until 1948, when he was 42 years old. He was the oldest rookie to ever be drafted into Major League Baseball. He pitched his last game at age 59. Sit with that for a minute. He's widely considered to be the hardest thrower in the history of baseball. He was unhittable. And in fact, he gave his pitches names like Bat Dodger and Midnight Rider and Trouble Ball and Long Tom. But the players who caught for him could not tell the difference between these pitches. Only Satchel Paige could. The catchers used to say that every pitch was just fast. He was the GOAT. Satchel Paige was and remains the GOAT. But I can't help to think of what if. What if his talent was the only thing that mattered? What if he'd been drafted as a young man rather than a man age 42? What could he have done? What could his teams have accomplished? In fact, the first team that did draft him into Major League Baseball at age 42 went on to win the World Series. Imagine all those seasons that the GOAT was left off the bench. What if he'd been given every opportunity to develop and showcase his talent? What if? This is what I think about. Because my research focuses on what makes teams and organizations and companies successful, what makes them innovative, what drives them forward. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the Satchel Paiges of the world and the way in which our organizations too often overlook talent when recruiting, hiring, retaining, and promoting. How often our organizations pay attention to things other than talent. Here's what I know for sure. Number one, no group has a monopoly on talent. Number two, our organizations are only as good as the talent that we have. And number three, if we're recruiting, promoting, rewarding folks based on anything other than talent, we're leaving talent on the bench. That's what I know for sure. So before touching on some of the strategies that research shows us can help build our bench, I'd like to first mention some of the really common pitfalls our organizations fall into, some of the things that stand in our way, ways that the status quo limits our ability to build a talented bench. The first pattern I see is the tendency to engage in groupthink. Research finds that work groups or teams or organizations that are too homogeneous, too cohesive, too close-knit, risk suffering from groupthink. Groupthink is the tendency to keep your own opinions to yourself in order to maintain group harmony, right? You keep your mouth shut and you go along with the majority. The tendency to conform to the majority's views. And while working with people who look and think and act like us may make us comfortable, research finds that it inhibits our ability to be productive and innovative. In homogeneous groups, nobody wants to rock the boat. Nobody wants to disagree. We tend to prioritize harmony over debate and dissent and disagreement. And I don't know about you, but when I have a difficult decision to make, I want to be surrounded by folks who will be honest with me no matter the consequences, who won't just tell me what I want to hear. I want folks around me who will think creatively and who will not be afraid to voice different perspectives. So while a homogeneous team or workplace can feel nice, it doesn't make us innovative. It doesn't drive us forward. The other tendency I tend to see is the tendency to engage in tokenism. This is the tendency to only make symbolic attempts at moving toward equity and belonging, promoting one or two at most members of a non-majority group and calling that inclusion. Scholars term this the one and done or the twofer model of advancement and inclusion. The problem with tokenism is that, like groupthink, it stifles collaboration, innovation, and creative problem solving. For tokens, being the only one or one of the only one at the table creates scrutiny and performance pressures. Everything you say and do is closely monitored and scrutinized. Tokens often have a sense of fear and futility of speaking out or speaking against the majority. So they keep their ideas to themselves. Tokens are talented people with really good ideas who all too often keep their mouth shut because, again, they don't want to rock the boat. But research also shows that for members of the majority group, those folks tend to overlook the talent and contributions of tokens. Tokens' ideas tend to be dismissed or not taken as seriously. Tokens often face a burden of doubt, a belief that they're not quite as good, not quite as skilled, not quite as smart. So research finds that these tendencies result in kind of a toxic mix that hurts our organizations and impedes good ideas from rising to the top. This doesn't get us anywhere. And the final kind of status quo kind of rut that our organizations can fall into is what I call the change treadmill. Research on efforts to advance equity and belonging finds that, first, organizations are often not willing to do the hard work of actually making needed change. Leaders are often all too willing to outsource the work of building equity and belonging to those most impacted by a lack of equity and belonging, right? Women, for example, are overwhelmingly expected to carry out the work of making their workplaces and teams more equitable, more fair, more inclusive. Yet this work is rarely compensated, it's rarely valued, and it's almost never recognized as core to the organization's mission. This isn't a great strategy, right? Research finds that when men speak up about equity and fairness, they're viewed as more legitimate. Their words are taken more seriously. They're given more weight and more gravity. Men who advocate for equity are simply more impactful and more effective. Yet all too often, women are expected to pull more than their own weight when it comes to advancing equitable policies in our workplaces. And the result is that we keep promising change, but we keep doing the same things. And you know what they say about folks who keep doing the same things over and over, but expect a different result, right? So as long as we stay on the change treadmill, some of us are exhausted and none of us are getting anywhere. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we can move beyond the status quo. What will it take to kind of spark a change or a shift beneath our feet? What does it look like when we move beyond the status quo, when we move beyond some of these patterns? Well, the first step may seem obvious, but I think it bears repeating. We must remove any barriers to talent rising. Our inclusion efforts fail if we keep existing barriers in place. Again, it seems really obvious, but I think all too often, if we don't see the barriers, we assume they don't exist. Scholars know, however, that high-impact practices really move the needle. We have overwhelming evidence about the policies and practices that advance equity and belonging in the workplace. Things like inclusive recruitment and hiring practices, zero tolerance for discrimination and harassment, transparent promotion practices, flexible working arrangements, objective performance evaluations. These things work. We have great science to back these policies up. But the problem is that not enough of our organizations have adopted these proven strategies. So unless you're intentionally, purposefully, and thoroughly seeking to identify areas in your practices or policies that are holding back talent, you're not going to be able to build your bench. You're going to be limited in your ability to recruit, retain, and promote the most talented folks in your industry. And again, just because you don't see the barriers doesn't mean they don't exist. Some practices, some barriers are like brick walls. They're clear, they're obvious, everybody can see them, but some are like windows, right? They're hard to see, but boy, you sure feel it when you knock your head against it. And as long as these barriers exist, we're all leaving talent on the bench at a time we simply can't afford to. The next strategy is somewhat counterintuitive for some of you. It's the idea that we need to invite dissent and disagreement into our problem-solving practice, into our problem-solving and leadership. Good ideas, collaboration, creativity, teamwork, these are the things that drive success. Yet research also finds that dissent and disagreement are also vital to sparking innovation in our organizations. So how do you signal that you're receptive to new and different ideas? How do you signal that you're open to different kinds of talent? Talent that may come in a package that is maybe non-traditional or atypical. How do you signal that you're open to new ways of doing things? Innovations that might actually improve your ability to do your job. We can't be afraid of disagreement. Disagreement, and by this I mean healthy, respectful disagreement, right? Sitting around the table and hashing out wicked problems that we have to solve. This can be the spark that moves us forward, that allows us to reach the next level. In fact, research finds that when leaders show openness and receptiveness to critique and dissent, people are more confident in their leadership and more likely to get behind their ideas and their strategies. Good leaders are humble. There's no room for ego when we're just trying to put the best ideas on the table. And good leaders actively invite dissent from those around the table. Good leaders are open to different views, open to alternative perspectives, and yes, open to dissent. Good leaders constantly ask, how do we know this decision is the right one? What if we're wrong? And perhaps most importantly, are there perspectives we have not yet considered? And if there aren't diverse perspectives around your table, then either you need a bigger table or you need a completely different table, right? Because what's going to drive us forward, what's going to spark that creativity and innovation is having different ideas, not the same ideas, right? Moving away from groupthink, embracing disagreement and dissent. And finally, a strategy that works is the idea that we must embrace difference as our superpower. Research on the relationship between diversity and organizational success is clear and overwhelming. The more diversity of perspectives and experiences you have, the better you are. My own research on this topic is just one example, and I could cite many other studies. The research is unambiguous. My research finds that organizations that double down on equity and belonging reap tremendous benefits. They have better retention records. They have stronger relationships with their communities. They are more innovative. They have more equitable policies. They are better governed, and they are more transparent. All of us should be striving for all of these characteristics for our organizations. And I rarely say that there's a magic bullet, but in fact, research suggests there is a magic bullet. And that's having all different kinds of ideas around the table contributing to major decisions. And it's not hard to understand why. Organizations that double down on equity and belonging understand that difference is a superpower, that no group has a monopoly on talent, and that an organization loses every single time it leaves talent on the bench. So I want to invite you today to think about what's possible. As we all know, we're at an unprecedented moment in our history. We're collectively navigating through deepening social and political frictions. We're facing unimaginable technological advances. We're experiencing social, demographic, and cultural shifts that none of us could have imagined even a few years ago. And I think about, and I invite you to think about, how can we best meet this moment in our workplaces, in our industries, in our communities? To confront these kind of wicked challenges, we need creativity in our decision making. We need openness to other perspectives. We need to be curious about what's possible. We need flexibility in our own thinking, because yesterday's ideas don't necessarily work in today's world. And we need a willingness to collaborate in a deep and meaningful way with folks who don't necessarily see the world the way that we do. We must be able to see beyond our habits, our comfort zone, our status quo. In our organizations, we must seek talent where it lives. We must seek out the satchel pages. We must fill up our bench with talent. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm deeply honored and grateful for this opportunity to be part of this great event. Thank you very much.